The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Beverly Hills mansion, casting golden light across marble floors that probably cost more than most people's cars. Victoria stood in her designer kitchen, stirring her organic green smoothie and checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Another email from her son's therapist. Another appointment reminder. Another bill for services that seemed to lead nowhere. Her 8-year-old son Alex sat at the breakfast table, quietly arranging his cereal into perfect rows. He hadn't spoken a word yet today. Actually, he hadn't spoken much at all in the past week. The specialist called it regression, but Victoria called it heartbreaking. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly, sitting beside him. Alex didn't look up from his cereal patterns. He never did anymore. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "Running late again. Big case, see you tonight." The same message she'd been getting for months. David's law firm kept him busy, but Victoria suspected he was also avoiding the reality of their home life. Who could blame him? Some days she wanted to escape too. The sound of keys jingling at the front door announced Rosa's arrival. Their housekeeper had been with them for 6 months now, and Victoria had to admit she was a godsend. The house had never been cleaner, and Rosa worked with a quiet efficiency that Victoria appreciated. No drama, no complaints, just consistent, reliable service. "Good morning, Mrs. Victoria," Rosa called out in her gentle accent as she hung up her coat. She was a small woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Morning, Rosa. I'll be in back-to-back meetings until 4 today. Alex has therapy at 2:30. The driver will take him." Rosa nodded and began unpacking her supplies. Victoria watched as Rosa glanced toward Alex, her expression softening. There was something almost maternal in the way Rosa looked at him, though Victoria couldn't quite put her finger on it. Victoria's life looked perfect from the outside. The mansion with its infinity pool and 3-car garage. The successful tech company she'd built from scratch and sold for $50 million. The designer clothes, the charity galas, the vacation homes. Her Instagram followers probably thought she lived in paradise. But paradise felt more like a prison when your child couldn't tell you he loved you back. Alex had been a normal baby. He'd smiled, laughed, babbled like all babies do. But somewhere, around his 2nd birthday, things changed. The babbling stopped. The eye contact disappeared. He became fascinated with patterns and routines but seemed to drift further away from human connection every day. The diagnosis came when he was 3. Autism spectrum disorder, they said. Severe, they added, as if Victoria needed the qualifier to understand how much her world had shifted. Since then, it had been a parade of specialists, therapists, and expensive programs. Applied behavior analysis, speech therapy, occupational therapy, sensory integration therapy. Victoria had tried everything money could buy. She'd hired the best developmental pediatrician in Los Angeles. Dr. Reynolds charged $400 an hour and had a waiting list longer than most restaurant reservations. He was kind, but realistic. "Some children make remarkable progress," he told her during their last visit. "Others have more limited outcomes. We just have to take it one day at a time. One day at a time." Victoria hated that phrase. She was used to setting goals, making plans, achieving results. In her business world, problems had solutions. Money could fix most things. But autism didn't care about her bank account. The house felt too quiet most days. Alex would spend hours in his playroom, lining up toys or spinning objects, completely absorbed in his own world. Victoria would sometimes sit outside his door, just listening to the silence and wondering what was going on inside his beautiful mind. Her friends tried to be supportive, but Victoria could see the pity in their eyes. At school pickup, other mothers would chat about their children's soccer games and piano recitals, while Victoria explained why Alex needed a special aid and couldn't attend birthday parties. "Have you tried that new center in Malibu?" One well-meaning friend had suggested last week. "I heard they have amazing results with nonverbal children." Victoria had already looked into it. $20,000 for a 12-week program with no guarantees. She'd probably try it anyway, Because what else could she do? The hardest part wasn't the lack of progress. It was watching Alex struggle. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of the bright, curious child trapped inside. He'd solve complex puzzles meant for children twice his age. He had an incredible memory for details. Last month, he'd recreated an entire page of Egyptian hieroglyphics after seeing it once in a museum book. But when it came to basic communication, to simple human connection, he remained locked away. Victoria finished her smoothie and gathered her files for the day. 3 board meetings, a conference call with investors, and a charity luncheon. She'd built her fortune by staying busy, by pushing forward, by never accepting defeat. But those strategies didn't work with autism. Rosa, there's leftover pasta in the fridge for Alex's lunch. He likes it at room temperature, not heated. Of course, Mrs. Victoria. Victoria paused at the door of Alex's playroom. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by colored blocks that he'd arranged into an intricate pattern. It was actually quite beautiful, like abstract art. For a moment, she considered sitting down beside him, maybe trying to understand his creation, but her phone was already ringing with the first crisis of the day. As she drove toward her office, in her white Tesla, Victoria thought about the conversation she'd had with David the night before. He'd been researching residential programs, places where Alex could get intensive, round-the-clock care. Maybe it would be better for him, David had said, not quite meeting her eyes. And better for us too. The words had hit Victoria like a physical blow. She understood David's frustration, his exhaustion, his grief for the family life they'd imagined. But the thought of sending Alex away felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. She pulled into her reserved parking spot at the gleaming office, building that housed her consulting firm. Inside, her assistant greeted her with the usual stack of messages and urgent requests. Victoria threw herself into work, the one area of her life where she still felt competent and in control. But even during her most intense meetings, part of her mind stayed home. She wondered what Alex was doing, whether he'd eaten his lunch, if he'd had any breakthrough moments that she was missing while she sat in conference rooms discussing profit margins and market strategies. At 3 o'clock, her phone chimed with a text from the therapy center. Alex did well today. Completed 3 tasks independently. See you next week. 3 tasks. It was progress, Victoria supposed. Tiny, expensive progress. She wouldn't know until much later that while she was celebrating those 3 small victories, something extraordinary was happening at home. Something that would change everything she thought she knew about her son, about autism, and about the incredible power of human connection. For now, though, Victoria just felt tired. Tired of hoping, tired of fighting, tired of pretending that money could solve everything when the thing she wanted most, her son's voice, remained priceless and out of reach. Victoria's client meeting ended earlier than expected. The investors had approved her proposal in just 30 minutes instead of the scheduled 2 hours. For once, efficiency worked in her favor. She glanced at her watch, barely past 2 in the afternoon. Alex wouldn't be back from therapy for another hour. Maybe she could actually spend some time with him today. Really spend time. Not just the rushed bedtime routine or hurried breakfast moments that had become their normal interaction. The thought made her feel guilty. When was the last time she'd sat on the floor and just watched him play? She drove, home through the winding streets of Beverly Hills, past perfectly manicured lawns and houses that looked more like museums than homes. Her own house came into view, all glass and steel angles that the architect had called a masterpiece of modern living. Right now it just looked empty. Victoria parked in the circular driveway and grabbed her purse. The house was quiet when she entered, which wasn't unusual. Rosa moved around like a ghost, cleaning and organizing without making a sound. Alex was probably in his playroom, lost in whatever patterns or puzzles had captured his attention today. She kicked off her heels and padded across the marble floor in her stockings. The click of expensive shoes always seemed too loud in a house where her son startled at unexpected sounds. Everything in their lives had been adjusted for Alex's sensitivity to noise, light, texture, change. Victoria headed toward the kitchen to grab a water bottle, but stopped when she heard something that made her freeze in place. Was that talking? The sound was coming from Alex's playroom down the hall, but it couldn't be Alex. He barely spoke more than a few words at a time, and usually only when prompted by his therapists. Maybe Rosa was on a phone call. Though Rosa never took personal calls during work hours, Victoria moved closer, her heart starting to beat faster. The voices became clearer, and she realized with shock that it was definitely Alex's voice she was hearing, but he was speaking in full sentences, animated and engaged in a way she hadn't heard since he was a toddler. She crept down the hallway, feeling like an intruder in her own home. The playroom door was slightly open, and she positioned herself where she could see inside without being noticed. What she saw made her legs go weak. Alex was sitting cross-legged on his favorite blue carpet, facing Rosa, who sat in the same position. Between them were scattered picture books, but these weren't his usual books about trucks or animals. These looked like language books, with colorful illustrations and text in what appeared to be different scripts. But the most shocking thing wasn't the books. It was Alex himself. He was talking, really talking. His face was animated, his hands gesturing as he spoke. His eyes were bright and focused on Rosa's face, eye contact that his therapists had been trying to achieve for years. And he wasn't speaking English. Victoria held her breath as she listened. Rosa was speaking in what sounded like Spanish, her voice gentle and encouraging. Alex responded in the same language, and his pronunciation sounded perfect. How was that possible? Muy bien, mijo, Rosa said, smiling widely. Now can you tell me about this picture in Portuguese? Portuguese? Victoria's mind reeled. Alex knew Portuguese. Without missing a beat, Alex switched languages. His voice took on different rhythms, different sounds, as he described the picture Rosa was showing him. Victoria didn't understand Portuguese, but she could hear the confidence in his voice, the joy even. Rosa picked up another book. What about this one? Can you read it in Chinese? Chinese? Victoria gripped the door frame to steady herself as Alex began speaking in what she assumed was Mandarin. The tonal qualities of his speech were completely different from English, rising and falling in ways that sounded fluent and natural. This had to be a dream, or a mistake. Her nonverbal autistic son was having a conversation in multiple languages with their housekeeper, and he was doing it better than most adults she knew. Rosa, Alex said, switching back to English but keeping the animated tone. Can we do the Arabic one again? I like how it sounds different from the others. Arabic? Victoria felt dizzy. Alex knew Arabic? Rosa laughed, a warm sound that Victoria rarely heard in their usually quiet house. Of course, sweetheart. You're so good at hearing the differences. Your brain is very special. Special. Victoria had heard that word applied to Alex countless times, but never in this way. Never with admiration and celebration. As Rosa began speaking in Arabic, Alex listened intently, then responded with what sounded like complex sentences. His whole body language was different, engaged, confident, happy. Victoria had never seen him look so alive. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Rosa switching between languages that Victoria couldn't even identify. Each time, Alex followed along perfectly, sometimes even correcting Rosa's pronunciation or asking questions about grammar. Grammar. Her 8-year-old son, who struggled to say "I want juice" in English, was discussing grammar in foreign languages. Victoria felt a mixture of emotions so intense, she thought she might be sick. Amazement at what Alex could do. Betrayal that Rosa had hidden this from her. Confusion about how this was even possible. And underneath it all, a growing anger. How long had this been going on? How dare Rosa keep this secret? What else didn't Victoria know about her own son? She watched as Rosa gathered up the books and Alex helped organize them into neat stacks. Even his movements seemed more purposeful, more connected to the world around him. Tomorrow we'll try the Italian book, Rosa said, ruffling Alex's hair. And maybe some more of that French poetry you liked. French poetry? Victoria's son, who had never shown interest in any books, was enjoying French poetry? Alex nodded eagerly. Can we also do more Mandarin? I want to learn the characters, not just the speaking. We'll see, mijo. Your mama will be home soon. At the mention of Victoria, Alex's demeanor shifted slightly, not back to his usual withdrawn state, but more subdued, like he was switching from one mode to another. Victoria quickly stepped away from the door, her mind racing. She made noise walking to the kitchen, giving Rosa and Alex time to transition to whatever they normally did when she was around. By the time she appeared in the playroom doorway, Alex was quietly building with blocks while Rosa dusted the shelves. The scene looked perfectly normal, except Victoria now knew it was anything but normal. "Hi, sweetheart," she said to Alex, who glanced up briefly before returning to his blocks. The animated child from moments before had disappeared, replaced by the distant boy she knew. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Victoria," Rosa said with her usual polite smile. Alex had a good day. Very calm and focused. Calm and focused. Not engaged and brilliant and multilingual. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched Rosa continue her dusting, moving around the room as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if Victoria's entire understanding of her son hadn't just been turned upside down. That evening, after Alex was in bed and David was locked in his home office with case files, Victoria sat in her living room staring out at the city lights. Her glass of wine sat untouched on the coffee table. Everything she thought she knew about her son was a lie. Or maybe not a lie, but only part of the truth. The quiet, struggling child she worried about every day was also a linguistic genius who could switch between languages like changing radio stations. And Rosa knew. Rosa had known for who knows how long and hadn't said a word. Victoria picked up her phone 3 times to call Dr. Reynolds, then put it down each time. What would she even say? That her housekeeper was teaching her autistic son 9 languages and he was excelling at all of them? It sounded crazy, but she'd seen it with her own eyes. Tomorrow, she decided, she would get answers. From Rosa, from Alex if possible, and maybe even from herself about how she'd missed something so incredible happening right under her own roof. Victoria barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alex's animated face as he switched effortlessly between languages she didn't even know he'd heard before. The image played on repeat like a movie she couldn't turn off. By 6 in the morning, she was already dressed and pacing the kitchen, rehearsing what she would say to Rosa. The questions tumbled through her mind faster than she could organize them. How long has this been happening? Why didn't you tell me? What else are you hiding? And the biggest question of all, how is this even possible? David had left early for court, kissing her cheek and mumbling something about a big day ahead. He had no idea that Victoria's world had completely shifted overnight. She envied his ignorance. Rosa arrived at her usual time, 7:30 sharp, carrying her worn leather purse and the small lunch bag she brought every day. Victoria watched her hang up her light jacket and wash her hands at the kitchen sink. The same routine as always, but everything felt different now. "Good morning, Mrs. Victoria," Rosa said with her gentle smile. "You're up early today." "I need to talk to you." Victoria's voice sounded sharper than she intended. "After Alex has breakfast." Rosa's hands stilled on the dish towel. Something flickered across her face. Worry, maybe guilt. Of course, Victoria made Alex his usual breakfast of plain toast cut into triangles and orange juice in his favorite blue cup. He ate quietly, arranging the triangles into patterns before taking small, careful bites. Looking at him now, Victoria searched for signs of the brilliant child she'd witnessed yesterday, but Alex seemed like the same distant boy he'd always been around her. After Alex finished eating and went to his playroom, Victoria cornered Rosa in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking slightly and she gripped the marble countertop to steady herself. "I came home early yesterday," Victoria began. "I saw you and Alex in his playroom." Rosa's face went very still. She set down the sponge she'd been using to clean the counter and turned to face Victoria fully. "I saw him speaking different languages," Victoria continued, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. Multiple languages fluently, and you were teaching him. The silence stretched between them. Rosa's dark eyes searched Victoria's face, as if trying to read her intentions. "How long has this been going on?" Victoria demanded. "And why didn't you tell me?" Rosa took a deep breath before answering. "About 4 months now, maybe a little longer." 4 months? Victoria felt like she'd been slapped. "You've been secretly teaching my son languages for 4 months and you didn't think I should know?" "Mrs. Victoria, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you know more about my own son than I do?" Victoria's voice cracked. All the frustration and helplessness of the past years came pouring out. "Do you have any idea what I've been going through? The specialists, the therapies, the sleepless nights wondering if he'll ever be able to tell me he loves me?" Rosa's expression softened. "He does love you, Mrs. Victoria. Very much. He talks about you all the time." "He talks about me? To you? In which language?" The words came out bitter and sarcastic. "In all of them," Rosa said quietly. "But mostly in Spanish. He says you work very hard to help him feel better." Victoria felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I don't understand any of this. The doctors said he might never speak normally. They said his communication would always be limited. But I watched him have conversations yesterday that were more complex than anything I've heard from him in English." Rosa nodded slowly. "May I sit down? This will take some time to explain." Victoria gestured to the kitchen island and they both took seats on the high stools. Rosa folded her hands in her lap and seemed to gather her thoughts. "In my country, in Guatemala, I have a younger brother named Miguel. When he was little, he was like Alex. Very smart, but different. He didn't talk much, didn't play with other children, got upset by small changes. My family didn't know about autism then. We just knew Miguel saw the world differently." Victoria listened, her anger beginning to mix with curiosity. "My grandmother, she had this idea. She spoke 5 languages, Spanish, English, some German from missionaries, Portuguese from traveling, and our indigenous language, Quiche. She started speaking to Miguel in different languages just to see what would happen." Rosa paused, a small smile crossing her face. Miguel came alive. It was like each language opened a different door in his mind. He wasn't just learning words. He was learning patterns, music, ways of thinking. By the time he was 10, he spoke 7 languages fluently. "What happened to him?" Victoria asked, despite herself. "He became a translator for the United Nations. He's in New York now, helping people from all over the world communicate with each other." Victoria stared at Rosa, trying to process this information. "So when you saw Alex?" "I saw Miguel. The same brightness hiding behind the same struggles. So I started very slowly, very carefully. Just a few words in Spanish while we played, then Portuguese when he seemed interested. He responded so quickly, Mrs. Victoria. His mind is like a sponge for languages." "But why didn't you tell me?" Victoria's voice was quieter now, less accusatory. Rosa looked down at her hands. "At first I was afraid you would fire me. I am just the housekeeper. I thought you might think I was overstepping, trying to be his teacher when you already pay so much for specialists. And later I was afraid you would take him to doctors who would try to stop it. I have seen it happen before. Parents get excited about their child's gift, but then doctors say it's just repetition, not real learning. They worry it will interfere with normal development." Victoria felt a chill. She could easily imagine Dr. Reynolds saying exactly that. "But it's not just repetition, is it?" Victoria asked. "He's actually understanding everything?" Rosa's face lit up. "Oh yes, Mrs. Victoria. He understands grammar, culture, even jokes. Yesterday he made a pun in Mandarin that made me laugh so hard. And his questions, he asks about why French sounds different from Italian, or how Arabic writing works. His mind is incredible." Victoria put her head in her hands. "I feel like I don't know my own son." "You do know him," Rosa said gently. "You know the part of him that struggles, the part that needs extra patience and love. I just found the part that soars." They sat in silence for a moment. Victoria could hear Alex moving around in his playroom, probably arranging his toys in the precise patterns that brought him comfort. "I need to see it again," Victoria said finally. "I need to understand what he's capable of." Rosa nodded. "Would you like to join us today? He might be shy at first. He's not used to sharing this part of himself with you. But I think he would like it." Victoria looked toward the playroom where her son was probably creating something beautiful and complex that she'd never bothered to really see before. "Rosa," she said, "I need to ask you something else. You said you recognized what Alex could do because of your brother. But how do you know so much about languages yourself?" Rosa smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "I have a master's degree in linguistics from the University of San Carlos. I specialized in multilingual cognitive development." Victoria's mouth fell open. "You have a master's degree, but you're working as our housekeeper?" "My degree isn't recognized here in the United States. I would need to go back to school, take tests, prove what I already know. It costs money I don't have and takes time I can't spare." Victoria stared at this woman she thought she knew. Rosa wasn't just their housekeeper. She was an expert in exactly the field that could help Alex, and Victoria had been blind to it for months. "Rosa," Victoria said slowly, "I think we need to completely change how we approach Alex's education, and I think you need to help me figure out how." That afternoon changed everything. Victoria sat cross-legged on Alex's playroom carpet for the first time in years, watching Rosa arrange colorful books in a semicircle around them. Her expensive business suit felt out of place on the soft rug, but she didn't care. "Alex, sweetheart," Rosa said gently, "your mama would like to hear some of the languages we've been practicing. Would that be okay?" Alex looked between Rosa and Victoria, uncertainty flickering across his face. Victoria held her breath, afraid that her presence might break whatever magic had been happening in this room. "It's okay, mijo," Rosa encouraged. "Show her the Spanish book we read yesterday." Slowly, Alex picked up a picture book about animals. He opened it to a page with a bright red bird and began to read aloud in Spanish. His voice was clear and confident, nothing like the hesitant whispers Victoria was used to hearing from him. Victoria felt tears start to form as she listened to her son speak with a fluency that seemed impossible. When he finished the page, she found her voice. "That was beautiful, Alex. Can you tell me what it said?" Alex looked directly at her. Eye contact that lasted more than a few seconds. "The bird lives in the rainforest, Mama. It eats fruits and builds nests in tall trees. You understood all of that?" Alex nodded, then reached for another book. "Want to hear Chinese, Mama? It sounds like music." For the next hour, Victoria watched her son demonstrate abilities that left her speechless. He didn't just speak these languages. He understood their rhythms, their cultural context, even their humor. When he told a simple joke in Portuguese, Rosa laughed genuinely and Alex beamed with pride. That evening, Victoria called Dr. Reynolds. She tried to explain what she'd witnessed, but even to her own ears, it sounded unbelievable. "Victoria, I understand you're excited about any progress," Dr. Reynolds said in his measured professional tone. "But what you're describing sounds like echolalia, repetition of sounds without true comprehension. It's actually quite common in children with autism." "It's not repetition," Victoria insisted. "He's having conversations, he's making jokes, he's asking questions about grammar. I think we should schedule an evaluation. Sometimes parents see what they hope to see rather than what's actually happening." Victoria hung up, feeling frustrated and doubted. But that doubt disappeared the next morning when she heard Alex chatting with Rosa in what sounded like Italian while they prepared his breakfast together. Over the following weeks, Victoria completely restructured her work schedule. She started coming home every day at lunch to spend time with Alex and Rosa. What she discovered amazed her more each day. Alex's progress wasn't limited to languages. As his confidence grew in his linguistic abilities, other areas of his development began to flourish too. He started making more eye contact, not just with Rosa but with Victoria as well. He began expressing his needs more clearly in English. He even started showing interest in playing simple games. The change was most dramatic during their evening routine. Instead of the usual struggle to get Alex to bed, Victoria now found herself sitting on his floor while he told her stories in different languages, then translated them into English for her. These became her favorite moments of each day. David noticed the changes too, though he remained skeptical about Rosa's methods. "I'm not saying it's not wonderful," he said one night as they got ready for bed. "But shouldn't we be consulting with professionals? Rosa is just a housekeeper." "Rosa has a master's degree in linguistics," Victoria reminded him. "She knows more about language development than most of the specialists we've been paying." "But what about his regular therapies? Dr. Reynolds thinks we should be focusing on basic communication skills, not confusing him with multiple languages." Victoria paused in brushing her teeth. "David, have you actually watched him lately? Really watched him? He's not confused. He's thriving." The turning point came 3 weeks later during a family dinner. Victoria had started a new tradition of eating together every evening, with Rosa joining them as both teacher and translator. Alex was explaining something about Mandarin tones when David's phone rang. "Sorry, I have to take this," David said, reaching for his phone. "No," Alex said firmly, looking directly at his father. "Dinner time is family time. Rosa taught me that. In Portuguese, tempo da família é sagrado." David stopped mid-reach, staring at his son. It was the first time Alex had ever corrected him. The first time he'd advocated for family time. The first time he'd shown any awareness of social boundaries. "What did he just say?" David asked Rosa. "He said, 'Family time is sacred,'" Rosa translated, her eyes twinkling with pride. David slowly put his phone aside. "Okay, son. You're right. Family time it is." That night, David came to Victoria with a proposal that surprised her. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting on the edge of their bed. "Maybe we should make Rosa's position more official. Hire her as Alex's language tutor instead of just our housekeeper." Victoria smiled. "I was hoping you'd come around to that idea." "I want to do more than that," David continued. "I've been researching multilingual education for special needs children. There are universities studying this approach, but there aren't many programs available. What if we started something here?" Victoria looked at her husband with new respect. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we used some of our resources to create a program that other families could access? Rosa could train other teachers, work with other children. We could prove that this approach works." The idea excited Victoria more than any business venture she'd ever considered. Rosa would need to get her credentials recognized here first. "I can help with that," David said. "I know immigration lawyers who specialize in professional credential recognition. It might take some time, but it's doable." The next morning, Victoria sat Rosa down for another life-changing conversation. "Rosa, how would you feel about going back to school here? Getting your degree recognized so you could officially work as a language therapist?" Rosa's eyes widened. "Mrs. Victoria, that costs so much money I could never afford. What if we paid for it? As an investment in Alex's future and in helping other children like him?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You would do that for me? I would do that for you, for Alex, and for all the children who could benefit from your knowledge." That afternoon, Rosa shared the news with Alex in Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin. His excited responses in all 3 languages filled the house with a joy Victoria hadn't felt in years. But the biggest change wasn't in Alex's language abilities, or even in Rosa's career prospects. It was in Victoria herself. She began learning Spanish so she could better understand her son's new world. She started researching autism from a completely different perspective, focusing on strengths rather than deficits. She also began reaching out to other parents in their community. At school pickup, instead of making excuses for Alex's differences, she found herself talking about his gifts. Word spread quickly about the boy who could speak 9 languages. Soon, other parents were asking questions. Could Rosa work with their children too? Was this approach available anywhere else? Could they observe a session to see how it worked? Victoria realized they were sitting on something much bigger than just Alex's personal breakthrough. They had discovered an approach that could help thousands of children, and Rosa had the knowledge to make it happen. The house that had once felt like a quiet museum began to fill with sounds of learning and laughter. children's voices speaking in different languages, parents asking eager questions, and Rosa's gentle teaching voice guiding them all. Victoria's tech company had made her wealthy, but watching her son flourish while helping other families discover their children's hidden gifts felt like the most important work of her life, and this was just the beginning. 1 year later, Victoria stood in the converted wing of their mansion watching something that still took her breath away. The space that used to house David's unused exercise equipment was now buzzing with activity. 8 children sat in a circle, with Rosa at the center, each one engaged in animated conversation switching between English, Spanish, and Mandarin. Among them was Alex, no longer the quiet, withdrawn boy she'd worried about for so many years. He was helping a younger girl with her Portuguese pronunciation, his patience and kindness evident as he gently corrected her accent. Victoria had to blink back tears watching her son teach another child. "Mrs. Victoria?" A voice behind her made her turn. Jennifer, the mother of 6-year-old Tyler, approached with tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you again. 3 months ago, Tyler hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. Yesterday, he told me he loved me in French." Victoria squeezed Jennifer's hand. "Rosa is the miracle worker. I just provided the space." But that wasn't entirely true anymore. Over the past year, Victoria had thrown herself into understanding Rosa's methods, learning about multilingual approaches to autism, and most importantly, advocating for recognition of this unconventional therapy. The journey hadn't been easy. Dr. Reynolds had been skeptical until he witnessed Alex's progress firsthand. The school district had initially refused to consider incorporating multilingual techniques into their special education programs. Insurance companies balked at covering what they considered experimental therapy, but the results spoke for themselves. Of the 23 children who had worked with Rosa over the past year, 18 showed significant improvements in communication, social interaction, and overall confidence. The success rate was better than any traditional therapy Victoria had researched. Rosa's credentials had been officially recognized 6 months ago, thanks to David's connections and Victoria's funding of the expensive evaluation process. She was now Dr. Rosa Delgado, licensed language therapist, though she still insisted the children call her simply Rosa. The transformation in Rosa herself was remarkable. The quiet housekeeper had blossomed into a confident professional who spoke at conferences and consulted with universities studying multilingual autism interventions. Just last month, she'd been invited to present her findings at Stanford Medical School. "Mama, come see," Alex called out in English, waving Victoria over to the group. She joined the circle, settling cross-legged on the carpet as she'd learned to do. "Tell your mama what we learned about Arabic today." Rosa encouraged a shy 8-year-old named Katie. Katie, who had been selectively mute for 3 years, looked directly at Victoria and began reciting Arabic numbers. Her mother, watching from across the room, covered her mouth to stifle a sob of joy. These moments happened daily now. Children who had been written off as having limited potential were discovering abilities that amazed their families and challenged every assumption about autism and communication. But the changes extended far beyond the therapy sessions. Victoria had used her business connections to create something unprecedented, a non-profit foundation that paired highly educated immigrants with neurodiverse children who could benefit from alternative learning approaches. The foundation now employed 12 former professionals whose degrees weren't recognized in the United States. There was Dr. Chen, a former mathematics professor from Beijing, who worked with children who showed exceptional numerical patterns. Dr. Amara, a music therapist from Morocco, helped children who responded to rhythmic learning. Dr. Petrov, a former art history professor from Ukraine, discovered that some autistic children could absorb incredible amounts of visual information when it was presented through art and cultural context. Victoria's mansion had become an informal research center. University professors came to observe and document the methods. Parents traveled from other states to learn about the program. Documentary filmmakers requested interviews. The most gratifying moment came when Dr. Reynolds called to apologize. "Victoria, I need to admit I was wrong," he said during their phone conversation. Alex's case has made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about autism therapy. Would you and Rosa be willing to present at our next medical conference? Standing on stage at the Beverly Hills Medical Center 3 months later, Victoria watched Rosa present their findings to a room full of doctors, therapists, and researchers. Rosa's English had improved dramatically, but more importantly, her confidence had soared. The key, Rosa explained to the audience, is not to focus on what these children cannot do, but to discover what they can do exceptionally well. Many autistic children have brains that process patterns, sounds, and structures in ways that are perfectly suited for language learning. She clicked to a slide showing brain scans. When we measured Alex's neural activity while he was switching between languages, we found patterns of connectivity that were actually superior to typical brains in many areas. After the presentation, a young mother approached them. "My daughter was just diagnosed with autism. Everyone tells me to prepare for limited communication, but after hearing this, bring her to see us," Victoria said immediately. "Let's find out what her brain does beautifully." The ripple effects continued to spread. School districts in 3 states had begun pilot programs based on Rosa's methods. Medical schools were adding coursework about strength-based approaches to autism. Most importantly, parents were learning to see their children's differences as potential gifts rather than only challenges. Alex, now 9 years old, had become something of a young ambassador for the program. He regularly spoke at conferences, switching effortlessly between languages to demonstrate his abilities. But what made Victoria proudest wasn't his linguistic skills. It was his compassion for other children who struggled. "Mama," he said one evening as Victoria tucked him into bed, "can we help the boy who started coming on Tuesday? He seems scared. What would you like to do to help him? Maybe I could teach him the Spanish words for his favorite things first." Rosa says that's how she started with me. Victoria kissed his forehead, marveling at the empathetic young man her son was becoming. "I think that's a wonderful idea." The foundation had grown beyond anything Victoria had imagined. They now had a waiting list of families wanting to participate, and a growing network of qualified multilingual therapists. David had left his law firm to work full-time as the foundation's legal counsel, helping more immigrant professionals get their credentials recognized. But the most meaningful change was in their family. Victoria no longer saw Alex's autism as something to be fixed or overcome. Instead, she celebrated the unique way his brain worked, understanding that his differences were inseparable from his gifts. Their dinner conversations now included multiple languages, cultural discussions, and lots of laughter. David had started learning Mandarin so he could better connect with Alex's interests. Even their extended family had adapted. Alex's grandparents were taking Spanish lessons so they could communicate with him in his preferred language. On quiet evenings, Victoria sometimes sat in Alex's room and watched him read books in different languages, switching between them as easily as changing television channels. She thought about that day a year ago, when she'd discovered Rosa teaching him languages in secret. At the time, she'd felt betrayed and confused. Now she understood that moment as the greatest gift anyone had ever given her family. Rosa hadn't just taught Alex languages. She'd shown them all a completely different way to understand autism, ability, and human potential. The Foundation's motto, written in 9 languages on the wall of their main therapy room, captured everything they'd learned. Every mind has its own genius. Our job is to help it shine. As Victoria turned off Alex's bedroom light and heard him whisper, "Good night, Mama," in Portuguese, she smiled. They discovered that some of the most profound help comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people we think we're helping end up transforming our entire world. The journey that started with a millionaire's shock had become a movement that was changing lives across the country. And it all began with a housekeeper who saw genius where others saw only struggle.